trick I have up my sleeve. I didn't think it would come to this, but I guess I have no choice. The one thing that can stop T-Series. Book review. You noticed how as soon as I stopped doing book reviews, sorry about that by the way, T-Series just swayed out of nowhere and took over? But no, I realize now, in the 11th hour, what I must do. I must review books again. That's what everyone wants. That's what will stop T-Series. It's never been so clear to me. I can't believe I realized it just now. Book time. The first book, well, I read a lot of books, but I wanted to select the ones that I really loved. There's 3 of them that I want to talk about, and hopefully you'll check them out as well. The first one is The Master and Margarita, written by Mikhail Bulgakov. It was written during the Soviet Union regime, and during that time, I didn't know this, but atheism was sort of forced upon the population. It was forced in schools, and people were generally harassed into becoming atheists. So this novel is sort of an answer to that. A lot of Russian books I've read so far are features themes around Christianity, but I think it's safe to say I never read a book like this. It's a black satire. It's a black satire comedy around Christianity. It's very weird, but I really loved it. Ironically, Mikhail, the author, burned the first version of this book because he thought he would never make it as a writer, writing a story like this during this time. And he wasn't wrong, because when he actually finished it 10 years later, he died shortly after, so it's nothing funny about that. And it wasn't published until 26 years after that, so it took a while, but it was recognized as a masterpiece, and it really is. The story follows a mysterious character who visits a group of writers sitting in a park during an autumn afternoon, and this mysterious character is a professor in black magic. These group of writers are obviously curious who he is, and they suspicious that he might be a spy, and he gets mistaken for one. This mysterious character is the devil reincarnated and named in the book Voland. All the writers are atheists, and Voland describes the second setting of the story, which is in Jerusalem during the Pontius Pilate trials. Everyone knows about this, the trials about the execution of Jesus. The writers almost say, oh, it's possible that this never happened. It's possible that Jesus never existed. And Voland sort of smugly describes this event as if he was actually there, which is obviously impossible. Voland also predicts that one of the writers' head will come off in an accident. And this, of course, gets brushed off, but later becomes true and get witnessed by one of the other writers, Ivan. Ivan goes absolutely crazy trying to pursue Voland, trying to capture him in absolute madness, absurdity, and comedy. I love reading this part. It gets even better from there. The Devil's Midnight Ball was one of my favorite parts of anything I read in a while. It's just fantastic. So I will just end it there. But Mikhail, the author of The Master and Margarita, he used to be a playwright, so it makes the writing very visual. I can really see all the characters and the mannerism and the humor in front of me. It really feels like you're there when you read it, and which really works well for the comedy as well. I laughed out a lot of times reading this book, and all this is really put together in a masterful story. It's a story that blends history with the author's own stories that he lived through and his own strides. It's a perfect balance, I think, of good and evil, and I really loved it. It was actually recommended by one of you guys, so I read one of the comments saying in another book review saying, oh, I think you're really gonna love this book, and you were right, so thank you very much. The Master and Margarita, 5 out of 5. Thank you for suggesting an actual good book. The next book I want to talk about is Japanese death poems and haiku. What is it called? It's a really long title. Japanese death poems written by Zen monks and haiku poets on the verge of death. That made it sound very depressing to read, but for me, I thought it was very uplifting. I'm very fascinated by the Eastern view, or the Eastern Asian view of death. As a Swedish person, it's almost a taboo subject. It's something that I grew up, you don't really talk about. And I think that's probably for a lot of people who at least watches this video, which I think makes it just even lonelier and scarier to think about. I don't think it's a healthy approach. And the Japanese view is more of death is something that's part of life. One of my favorite quotes from a book, another great book I read actually, I recommend, Norwegian Wood by Murakami. Death is not the opposite of life, but an innate part of it. By living our lives, we nurture death. Anyhow, this view of death is deeply rooted in Japan and Japanese culture through death poems, or jisei as they're called. That sounds funny. And its origin comes from Zen Buddhism. And the first documented jisei is from Prince Otsu in 1686. But jiseis still occur today. I found out about death poems from one of my favorite writers, Yukio Mishima, and I was just so fascinated by the fact that that's an actual thing. A small night storm blows, saying falling is the essence of a flower, preceding those who hesitate. To put it simply, it's a poem written at the time of death. But sometimes they're written even before, sort of as you'd write a will, for example. Haiku is a form of poetry you're probably already familiar with. It follows the 5-7-5 syllable count. Basho, world famous Japanese poet who defined this style of writing where you count the syllables of the poem. His death poems reads as, falling ill on a journey, my dreams go wandering over withered fields. Haikus often focus on the transient of things, thus often reflects on nature, bringing in the sadness of leaves falling from the cherry blossom because they don't last very long, for example. Here's one written by Bainen. Now spring has come into my world. Farewell. So the book starts off with Zen Buddhism, which is actually my favorite part of the book. I didn't think I would enjoy it. I kind of wanted to just jump to the haikus, but it just features incredible stories of Zen Buddhists or masters that died sitting upright, and right after they finished their last brush strokes of their poem. I don't know if that's true or not, but it just sounds badass, and I like the idea that there's actual records of this badass monk movie cliche that you see. Actually has some merit to it. The book features around 300 haikus. Some are funny, some are sad, some are strange. I'll read some more examples. I wish to die in spring beneath the cherry blossoms while the springtime moon is full. Written by Saigon. Here's another one I liked. Death poems are mere delusion. Death is death. This one is written by Baiseki. The journey west, a way that all would travel. Flower field. West is said to be where the paradise is in I don't know when they believed in that. Dying with regret is seen as a bad thing to carry when you're passing over to the paradise. This poem is a perfect example of a haiku because it brings in something personal mixed with nature. Another one, for example, I long for people, then again I loathe them. End of autumn. It's almost comical, isn't it? How can we fit nature in there? End of autumn. But I really do love haiku. I think it's a perfect way to really describe an emotion. I really like the idea of bringing something or bringing structure to something abstract. Of mixing left and right brain, mixing art with logic, for example, having the set of rules of how a poem should be, and that I think that's what really makes them good as well. So I wrote a poem myself. Here it is, if you want them. Autumn moon shines bright, a lonely red leaves falls down. Your mom gay. No, I'm just kidding. Okay. Ending road ahead. I should travel back home soon. Forever sunset. The way the Japanese language works, it's obviously different because the syllables are much more defined, as the letters are ko, go, wa, ga, shi, and so on and so forth. So it doesn't really work the same way in English, and there's all kinds of techniques that also doesn't really translate. So it's never gonna be you can try and translate haikus to English, but it's never gonna be the same thing, obviously. But I recommend writing a haiku. It's actually really easy. It's actually really fun. All you need to know is that it's 5 syllables first line, 7 syllables middle line, and then 5 syllables afterwards. And it's usually something personal mixed with nature and a passing moment described. So why don't you try it? I wouldn't give this book higher than a 4-star rating. It is quite dense in the beginning. It felt like it didn't need to. It also had a strange structure to it, which was kind of annoying when reading it. Other than that, it's a great book. It features a lot of haikus that's never been translated before, so I really, really loved it, and I recommend it even as much as any other book I talk about today. Next book, Don Quixote. Yeah, that's right. You never heard about this one. Everyone knows about Don Quixote, the nobleman who read too many night stories and decided to go on a knight's errand, even though that doesn't exist anymore. Everyone knows about the story of Don Quixote, who mixed up the windmills with dragons and fought them anyway. But I think most of all, everyone knows Don Quixote for its humor and for how silly it is and what a lovable character it is. And yes, it is. It is very humorous. But after reading it, I realized that it's so much more than just that. And I'm so glad I read it. It's my favorite piece of classical literature that I've ever read. It was written in 1600 by Cervantes. I don't know. I probably pronounced that wrong. And it's been described as the best literary work ever written. I've also seen it described as unreadable. There's a lot of different versions of Don Quixote to make it more normie, I guess. I don't know. I remember I read Don Quixote before, but a stripped down version of it, but nothing really could. Read the original. The book is written in a way where Don Quixote seems like he's an actual person that exists in the world. A terrible example would be kind of like found horror movie clips to make it seem real. This is Lost Archives to make it seem like, oh yeah, this is a real story that actually took place and Don Quixote is a real person. In the second half of the second part of the book, Cervantes is even himself mentioned in the story, because of course the first book has already come out and Don Quixote is now famous, and Don Quixote reacts to other people reacting to Don Quixote, which is hilarious as well. So it's a really funny and bizarre thing. But anyway, the story also of course follows not just Don Quixote, but his famous and loyal squire Sancho Panza, who joins Don Quixote in the promise of becoming a governor one day. Sancho adds great relief to Don Quixote because he sort of questions his ideas and his sanity and all these random insane interactions that Don Quixote goes through when in his pursuit of knight's errant virtue and all that, because Don Quixote believes everything he's read in books. So he treats the whole world as if that's the case, and anything that sort of challenges that idea and goes against that idea, he blames on one way or another. It could be that, oh, it's a wizard sage cast a spell on me, so I'm under illusions, and that's why I see it, but no one else does. What makes this funny, or I think at least what makes this work, is that Don Quixote is actually completely reasonable as a person. The way he justifies all these things happening and the way he justifies his action is completely reasonable. You realize he's not an idiot, he's not a fool, and he can sway Sancho Panza to follow him and do what he wants him to do, and he believes it himself 100% as well. That's the thing. But of course other people don't believe Don Quixote and whatever ideas he has, and he becomes a mockery for them as well. The fact that Don Quixote wholeheartedly believes it makes it really sad. It's a really sad story in a lot of ways. I think a lot of people can probably relate to, at least when you're younger, wanting to do something noble, wanting to do something greater, but as you grow older, you sort of give up on that idea. I mean, everyone does, obviously, but not Don Quixote. And this story tells of that tale, and you can really only love him for him. Don Quixote and Sancho Panza really are legendary characters, and I miss them. It's really weird to say that. It's such a long book, but it's the longest book I've read, but it's also the longest book I've ever enjoyed. And honestly, I can't wait to reread it. I could go on more, but there's really no point. It is quite hard at some points, and I'd be lying to say if I thought it was like the easiest read I ever had, but it's 100% worth it. So check it out if you're interested. Check out all these books. Don Quixote, 5 out of 5. Beautiful. I'm so glad I read it. Now, for next book review, I wanted to mention a book that you guys can read, and we can discuss it in next book. Next month, if I do a book review, when I do a book review, will be The Woman in the Dunes by Kobo Abe. I don't know if that's how it's pronounced. Kobo Abe has been described as the Kafka of Japan. It's a pretty short story, so holy shit. I forgot to mention the book has some very strong sexual parts in it. I guess this is a trigger warning. I probably should have realized before I recommended this, but anyone can pick this up and read it in, I don't know, a week or two. And it's a concept that I think is interesting to discuss. So if you're looking for something to read, check that out, and I'll talk about it in the next month. As always, if you have recommendations for me, I always find that interesting. I've also created a subreddit where you guys can discuss as well and interact, and I will take parts from that and reviews and ideas in the next book review. So hopefully we can have more of a dialogue going, because I felt like that was what was missing. I felt a bit discouraged doing book reviews because it felt like no one has actually cared or interacted with it or read the books, but I'm told now that a lot of people actually did, which I think is really cool. I also will fault myself, because I think in this pursuit with T-Series, I've been too focused on the numbers and just pushing that narrative, which has been fun, but I also kind of miss just doing whatever I feel like, or whatever I actually have a more personal interest in. So anyway, that's